Hey guys, it's Phil Zio here from One Wall Studios, and I'm doing a review of a product today. Just so you guys know, I did get a review copy code of this, so I didn't have to pay for it. But I think you'll find that depending on your tastes, it's very much worth paying for, especially at the price that it's offered at $20 on It Might Get Loud Productions' website or their store online. First of all, what is it? What makes it special? What makes it different? It is a drum machine, much like Steven Slate Drummer or Addictive Drums or Easy Drummer or Superior Drummer or MT Power Drummer, and the list goes on and on of the different drum samplers that exist. So what makes this different? Well, actually a lot of things. First off, you'll notice the interface is a little funny for a drum sampler. None of these are labeled, these faders. You don't know that this is a panoramic potentiometer until you turn it and you find out. You'll notice that the snare says gent, jazz, and beef. So what happens when you drag one down? Listen to how the snare changes. Crank all of them. Ooh, big sound. Also, you've got a rack tom, another rack tom, and a floor tom, which I have panned left, right, and further right. The only other option that you see visible here, besides having a name, which is cool, is the resize button, which does exactly what the name entails. It just resizes the UI. Very helpful for if you're on a smaller monitor or on a massive monitor, and you really just need this much, or just need a ton. Like, you can get this thing pretty big before it stops working. So, yeah, that's very helpful for people with small monitors. I know a lot of people actually complain about that on other drum samplers, that they're not resizable, specifically certain ones that won't be mentioned here because this is a review. So, another thing that's noticeable immediately is that there are 30 outs. Now, I'm on Reaper. Different DAWs work differently with track counts. You'll notice that there are 30 outputs. That's one stereo output for every sample. So this one gets its own output, this one gets its own output, this one gets its own output. And you'll notice down here, reflected in the mixer, that when I press the button, bass drum 1, bass drum 2, bass drum 3 respond. I have them all routed to individual track parent folders so that I can just manipulate them as if they were all a single track based on however much I blended them. But, for example, if I were to take the middle fader and drag it all the way down, bass drum 2 no longer has any sound coming. And that's because each of these faders is routed to a fader out here, meaning you need 30 outputs to get the fullest extent of this program. Now, what you could do is take, for example, any one of these individual outputs, route just the audio to, say, 6 tracks of audio to one track, and on that particular track, set it so that the input channels are the same, and the width is not, with the number of track channels being, for example, 6, and so on and so forth, until you get the desired amount of mono, stereo, blends, etc. But for the purpose of this review, I have every single one of these on their own track, because honestly, I'm pretty sure that's how the program was supposed to work. Now then, what's the important part? Oh, right, hearing it. So, listen to this. Honestly, these samples are pretty beefy, pretty intense, very dry sounding. Also, for the cymbals, I'm using Steven Slate Drummer. One thing that you'll notice if you ever get this is that these are just shells. Djenthuggah is only a drum shell plugin. But on the bright side, it also comes with TCI triggers. So if you have Steven Slate Trigger, you can replace drums with these samples. And GOG files. So if you have Drum-A-GOG, you can replace your kit with those files. So check it out. Listen to how well these drums stand out in a mix. Even better, if you listen to the individual samples themselves, they react really well to a decent amount of equalization, compression, and clipping. So for people that really want to get a punchy sound, you can manipulate these actually relatively well to your heart's content. And they sound pretty great the whole time through. So for all of these, including the tom samples, I just did a little bit of EQ, compression, and used JST clip just to bring up the overall level a little bit. And then I added finality. And the analog studio rack just to give it a little bit more punch, clarity, and it responded really well to them the whole time. Now on the toms, I am cutting a little bit, and by that I mean a lot, around 600 hertz, because some of the samples had a lot of it, some didn't. What I also like is that you're able to hear each individual sample for any result that you don't like. So, this is just the first bass drum sample. Ooh. This is the second. I have it turned down really low. But you can hear how each sample sounds in interaction with each other. I think that's something that, while a little bit strange that they would have 30 outputs for 5 drums, it's actually really cool to see how they did that and how well I think it works. Listen to how it cuts through in a mix with just guitar and some other stuff like pan flute. While more melodic than Djenty, I think that does a good job of demonstrating what this plugin's capable of. As I said towards the beginning of the video, not only does it come in a drum sampler program, but it also comes in a variety of drum sample replacements. So, what I did in this part of the demonstration is I took a real drum kit, played the kit a little bit, replaced every individual piece with the samples that are all loaded, and then, if you'll notice, I loaded them in different channels in Slate's Trigger. Channel 1, Channel 2, Channel 3, respectively, are the kick body, and kick character samples. And throughout the song, I automated them. So the default, just being kick, it's just going to be the kick sample. Then I'm just going to have the body sample for this section, and then just the character sample for this section. And a combination or blend of all of them that I actually quite liked on my own in the final section. So just to get a small taste for it, this is with no sampling on anything except the overheads and finality on the drum bus, just to bring up the overall level a little bit. Not even really triggering gain reduction on it or having any of the aggression or coloration enabled. How does it sound? Pretty interesting, I'll be honest. There are a couple of weird things that I'll mention in a moment, but I was surprised at how much I got out of a pack of drum samples marketed towards a djent market. This feels straight up old school rap. Like, these could be real useful for a hip hop beat. Almost unintentionally. Now for the body section, you get a little bit more of that thickness, a little bit more of that character, but not quite djent character. These are more like thuddy samples. You'll especially notice it in the kick. The snare actually goes down in volume a lot with this sample, which would make sense because in the original plugin, it considered it a jazzy sample. Now we get into the djenty part, the character. Immediate change. You'll notice right away that the toms sound much girthier, but also a lot more scooped. Real punchy. And then finally, my favorite, the blend of all of the above. The whole kit has this huge sense of body now. And throughout the whole song, I've been surprised at how versatile these samples were. There's only 3 of each. Keep in mind, for $20, that's pretty great, in my opinion. It's almost like having a different sample for each mic that they used, but at the same time, it's more than that, because they sound all individually processed to fit a certain spectral necessity, almost. Like, some of them are more mid-rangey, some of them have more body, some of them have more high-end. Specifically, the character one has a lot more high-end. If you'll notice the snare here. That's really high-end. Now, there are a couple things that are worth mentioning. And yes, I think it's a great sounding pack. Don't judge it by the sound of my mixes, because none of this stuff is done. This is all in the recording phase. Basically loose ideas that I had put together for this demonstration. But you gotta admit, with no processing on these drums, that sounds pretty cool. And even better, it fits for almost every type of instrumentation. This sounds more roomy and natural. One thing I will say is that some of these samples don't trigger like they should. For example, that one, it didn't trigger. Why is that? Well, you have to increase the range of the individual samples. Now, this was only I found in Slate Trigger. I didn't have these problems in Djenthuggah, but you see how it triggers now? Same with the snare, same with the toms, but it's only in the body and character samples. So the original kick sample, very dynamic, didn't have any issues with velocity. Only at the top velocities will these trigger. For some reason, it's kind of a problem. But if you can work around that, you do get some really interesting sounding samples for $20. Now, honestly, I thought I would have had to pay like $50 if I wanted to buy these just as they are, because you also do get a drum sampling program, so you don't need a sample replacement program to trigger them with. You can use them as intended without having to buy any other rompler, any other sampler, and bam, they sound pretty great, useful for multiple different genres. I actually had a hip-hop guy, one of my clients, say, hey man, can you use that in one of my songs for a beat? Because those samples sound dope. And I was like, heck yeah, man, we can do that. But the whole point is, Djenthuggah is fascinatingly actually really helpful at doing things that I didn't expect it to. It's got a decent smattering of possibilities, and look what happens when I untrigger this. Now, for the reference, I haven't tuned these drums in a long time, but look what happens when I get rid of all the processing. The difference between what's on Djenthuggah and what's real. With Djenthuggah as the sample. Same up here with the body. With the samples. Ooh, so much tighter. And then the character one, oh my goodness, this one's a huge drastic difference. Probably the most... You can tell the character's probably just for effect, for blending with other samples, but it's still got its own place, and I quite like it. And now all the samples played with decent blend of all of them. One thing I'll say, they definitely know how to choose good sounding samples, especially in the context of a mix. I think these fit really well. When I heard what people were doing with them, I was amazed and wanted them for sure. But even with high gain guitars, they really stand out. I actually love these samples. I can highly recommend them to literally anybody. I think they sound great, and I think they're, again, far more versatile than I ever could have expected from a Djent-targeted sample pack. So do yourselves a favor, go out, listen to the demos you can get, try them out. These mixes are nowhere near complete, but just putting Djenthuggah on the drums already made me feel like I was a little bit closer to having a finished product, which is absolutely amazing. Because usually I love tweaking drum samples till, like, the cows come home. But this was definitely a fantastic experience. It might get loud productions. Thank you very much. I'm going to use these for sure. Thanks. And if you guys have any other stuff you want me to check out, leave a comment below. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you again. This is Phil, and I'll see you next time.